Hey, welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast, and I am Pastor Plek, and I've got in studio with me Pastor Joseph Charles Aiken III, and I am so glad to have you with us.
What's going on, everyone?
And also, Mrs. Leah Brown, welcome back.
Hi.
You know, this is really fun. This is another episode where you get to join us. Pretty great.
And I'm missing my sidekick for this one.
I know. It's how'd you pull that off?
Your wife owed me a favor. Actually, it's a preemptive favor because I'm about to do her a favor when we're done with this. So,
that's good. Yeah, it's a little tit for tat. That's how
I
we roll
could
around
just
here.
leave though, and then we'd call it a bait and switch.
Do it.
That might happen.
All right, so we're doing another episode on the Buffalo shooting, or maybe probably a better way to put that is a follow-up to the Buffalo shooting podcast, in which we talked about how the white supremacist went out and killed, was it 13 people? 11 people.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay.
Might have been 10 and
Killed a bunch of people.
yes.
And the bulk of whom were black. And I got a really interesting question regarding this because it was another shooting in New York that happened, I think, back in
10 dead,
Okay, there were 10 dead,
3 injured.
Yep.
3 injured, and I think of the 13, 11 were black, 2 were white.
That's what it was, right? Mm-hmm.
All right. So then I'll just go with the question, and it's a follow-up to that Buffalo episode. I hate racism. We all should. We've got a brown guy living at our house. We're not a racist home, and I'm glad to see our church speak out against it and work proactively against it, which I'm assuming that the questioner is a white guy or a white family. However, racism in all forms is abhorrent. So why do we choose to do a special edition podcast for this shooting and not the black supremacist shooting on the New York subway last month? Is it because the 18-year-old is a better shot? Oh, gosh. And actually killed people versus shoot 33 rounds in the subway and only injure people? Or why not speak out against the black on Asian race hate crimes that plagued the country over the winter that were largely caught on video? Or is it maybe because y'all didn't even know about these other instances of racism since they were not widely talked about in popular media? We should call out racism, and I agree with this podcast, but why do we call attention to it when it's white on black and not the other way? Isn't all racism equally abhorrent, and shouldn't all racism be spoken out against equally? All right, so I'm going to answer that first part. Isn't all racism equally abhorrent? Yes, all racism is bad, and we are against all racism. So I can say, I feel like what we talked about last time on the Buffalo shooting was a black evangelical person sort of calling out white evangelicals for not speaking out against this. And now here we have a white evangelical speaking out against, in general, evangelicals for not speaking out against racism. So racism is bad. Black, white, black, all bad. But I will admit that I didn't know, and maybe it was because it wasn't publicized enough, that it was a black supremacist or a black nationalist. And I don't know if either of you had followed that.
I mean, I had heard the story. For me personally, I don't just walk around talking about black or white supremacists,
Right.
nationalists, or whatever.
Right.
So when people send in questions,
Yeah.
and I'm here with you, I answer and talk about the questions you ask.
Right.
And so for someone to say, hey, look, I have a brown person that lives in my house. I'm not racist. You know, first off, the fact that you got to, I don't know.
It's not the best way to phrase a question
Yes.
to make your point that you're trying to make.
Yes. You know, the kids would say that sounds sus, which means suspect.
Yes.
You know, in itself. That's kind of sus. But anyways, not trying to say this person is racist or not, but to say is like, look, I love black people. Look, I got black friends. You know, that's what it sounds like.
Right.
Someone's trying to, I don't know. You shouldn't need to do that. But anyways.
And maybe this is a good question. Is there something, or is it ever appropriate for a white person to sort of like tout their non-racist like proof?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, hey, I'm not racist because. Are you allowed to say that as a white person? It's probably the wrong way to put it. Allowed to say.
I mean,
Is that incendiary to kind of say, hey, look at my black friend? Or does that make sense?
The PR guru in me is about to faint from all of these ways you're saying these things, but I want to hear what Joseph has to say.
I don't know. Your actions speak louder than your words. So I don't think you need to point out you're black, or like I don't walk around and I don't know. I don't think you need to point out that. You just do it. You just love people.
Love people.
You just love people. You know, you're intentional about it, and we see it. You shouldn't have to prove that I'm not. I love black people. I love white people. I love Hispanics. I love whatever in your actions. I don't know. I don't know that there's ever a time, but I don't want to speak for all. I'm not going to speak in an absolute. Speak for all people.
Sure.
You know,
And I think maybe this is what it is. When I'm going to speak for white people for a moment, which is probably, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that either. But when a white person feels they're being attacked, they want to bring their proof to the table. Like, for example, if they say, hey, you are not on a racist thing, hey, you don't really love Jesus. And they would say, well, no, I go to church, I pray, I do all these things. Now, do we really know if you love Jesus or not? We don't really know, but you're bringing your evidence to the table. But how often, I guess the real question then is, how often are people questioning your racial motives? And maybe in today's culture, that's happening a lot more. So maybe that's what were you going to say to it was the PR nightmare that question is?
No, it was a lot of just the phrases that were being used. But the thing that's going on in my head is I think that there are a lot of things that we're told to use as more of like heart checks that we end up bringing to the table as proof to defend ourselves, which is where you were going with that. So it's like, heart check, you know, what's that thing? Check your last 10 text messages, right?
Right.
You know, and like, does everybody look like you or do they not?
Right.
That's like, it's like a heart check thing, but it doesn't need to, when you turn it into like a measurement of your achievement.
Right. Now it's a problem.
That's how I see it. But I could be wrong too.
No, I like the way you put that. Yeah. So yeah, I think there is a reality. Just going back to the New York subway, reading this question is the first time I knew or had heard that this was a.
Was it a? I mean, you'd have to even with that.
But
it's wrong.
But
did he go?
My thought though, that people. I didn't know it was a racially motivated thing. To which, when we looked up sources for it, I found the New York Post and I found the New American, and I know the New York Post, they're about as conservative as the New York Times is liberal, so it might be a difficult thing to sort of like, where's the bias? I didn't hear anything from the New York Times on that, and so maybe that's maybe not that I need to be at the New York Times is my like landing of like viability or truth. I don't ever want to go there.
It's okay, Chris. Let's get to the point. I think it's always tricky to ascribe motives to somebody else, and so every time the papers do that on either side, I mean, I always ask questions, you know, you can find, if the person is directly stating their motive, that's one thing. But when it's other people saying, well, this person did this because this or that, this, like, I don't know. I don't trust the papers to tell me everyone's motive, but on both sides.
Okay.
But like when there's a manifesto involved, that you can pretty much link to the source, and, and he's saying that this is his reasoning for doing something, that's a little bit more concrete.
Sure. And I think both shooters had something like that. The Buffalo shooter clearly had a full on like.
I mean, the neighborhood he went to.
Yeah, it was pretty clear. And then the New York subway shooting suspect, he had some posts that weren't quite as clear, but were more down the direction of black nationalism. All right, so I think it's a fair question of why would we do that. I think whenever it comes to, like, maybe it wasn't brought to my attention because I thought initially that the subway shooting was just a crazy person shooting up the place.
So I hear the question, if we really boil it down, is how do you decide what to talk about?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What I really decided to talk about is what questions we get asked. Honestly.
Well, and also like what impacts you and what.
Yeah. And what is culturally, and I do think it is a thing. Like maybe if I had known that was a thing, a black I would have talked about it. I just didn't realize it was because I hadn't seen it, hadn't heard about it as being like a black nationalism against white people. I just hadn't heard that. And so this show right now, as we're talking about it, I found a couple posts that sort of reveal that, again, from right-leaning publications, nothing from the left side of it. Whereas I think fairly, the Buffalo shooting was covered across the board as for being a hate-filled crime of racism. So, which I think is fair. So I just didn't hear about it, didn't know about it. So my ignorance isn't my, I guess my.
You didn't have some underlying motive.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, there isn't like I'm trying to tamp down anything that might make black people not look like they could be racist. That's not my. I mean, I think racism could be a thing in any white, black, Asian, Hispanic. Anybody could have a racist tendency and act out on it. So anyway, I think that I think we beaten that horse. Is it dead?
It can be dead.
Any other thoughts on that horse?
I mean, I have thoughts, but
I do want to hear.
I think more so the question was answered of how do we pick the topics? Yeah. And so that's the big thing. Like if that was the basis of the question, how do we pick the topics? Because people send in questions and ask that. You don't have to say to validate. I don't know. That's my thing. Validate you're not a racist. Talk about, was it because he was a better shot than or because like all those different things just
weird.
It's just
sus.
Yes, it's sus.
Very sus.
Very sus.
Well, I appreciate the lingo. I'm becoming very extra.
Almost used correct.
Great. Sorry, I'm working on it. What was the other one? There was drip. So I got my drip today is I'm waiting for my yacht, by the way, and I'm very extra and animated, right? And then we were talking about something very sus.
That was the best one right there. There you go.
All right, sorry. Go ahead. I don't know if we totally derailed our show with that.
No, it matters how you say things.
Okay, yeah.
Right? It does. And I would guess that the person who sent the question in had the best of intentions, but it matters how you say things. So educate yourself to say things a little better. Maybe.
As the great Obama once said, words matter.
I have all the best words.
Okay.
Which great president said that?
I don't. Oh, that would have to be Donald J. Trump. I have all the best words.
He did say that.
Of course.
Sorry.
He did. We could do a moment of like great quotes from Donald Trump, but I don't know if that's going to be this show. All right, I have another question related to the Buffalo shooting. What does a Buffalo shooting tell us about the state of young men? Because I think this kid was 18. If it does tell us anything, how should we think about just punishment for the shooter? Is it more biblical to think that the death penalty should be applied or life in prison? Okay, so we're going to start there, and then the person's going to want to get to Second Amendment. But I'm going to go to Leah, who's our life person around here.
I need to see this question written out before
Here, I'll show it to you right here.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, what does this say about the state of young men? Let's just go there. I'll ask Joseph about this, and I'll let you kind of think of the life question. What do you think this thinks about the state of young men as a whole?
I mean, I don't think this can talk about the state of young men, because then if that's the case, I go to all the 18-year-olds who are in college or whatever they're doing well. So I don't think this.
Sure, and you could say, well, the guy that did the subway shooting, he was 62. What does it say about old men?
Yeah,
you can't extrapolate one scenario and make a blanket statement for an entire group of people.
Right.
The media loves to do that. They love to do that.
Right. Okay. So maybe this particular shooting does not get us to a place of, I don't know, the state of young men across the country. But could it be that maybe this men are looking for a leader to follow, and they are willing to act on propaganda? I mean, is that what you could say? And maybe that's just not young men, that's all men? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Men are looking for a leader to follow. I mean, you can't say that.
People are always looking for belonging and for a purpose.
Sure. But does this shooting kind of like, I am now furthering my cause. Everyone's going to say, way to go. I'm championing the cause of nationalism, which white or black, because we can kind of talk about both sides of this. I'm championing my cause. My people are going to be for me. They're going to say, way to go. You are a patriot. You're a real hero. You're the real thing. And do you think there might be a sense of validation that as a man they're looking for, because they haven't, and this is why people follow cults, and this is why people follow all sorts of craziness, fly across the country to join certain, retreat centers and do weird things, because they're looking for their They're looking for their flock, and they're looking for someone to validate them as a man and for their beliefs to kind of. And as a Christian, I obviously have done the same thing. I've followed Jesus. And so I was looking for a leader, and I followed Jesus, the God of the Bible, to follow. And I've done that. And I think that's in everybody to worship. And so what happens is when our worship goes from Jesus and the word that he's presented, and it goes to a man, and we kind of take an extremist viewpoint to sort of carry out the wishes of a man as opposed to being a Jesus follower, then we run into problems.
Yes.
I'm torn. I'm torn between you can't take this one situation and create an entire worldview out of it.
Sure.
Versus how do you look at this event through a biblical worldview? You can do both. Should you do both? Probably the latter. But this Buffalo shooter, because here's what I want to say.
Right.
The Buffalo shooter, he said he wanted to be famous, right? He said that. We know his motive. He said it. He wanted to be famous. That's why a lot of people that are talking about it refuse to say his name. They don't want to make him more famous.
Right.
So we know what he was about. I don't know if it really says anything about the state of young men. Now, from as a church, from a biblical worldview, can we glean something from it? Maybe.
Yeah, I guess maybe we all want to be famous. Okay, here's one. Can I show you this? I actually took a screenshot of this, and I wish I could put it like on this screen right here, and maybe I could if I was that smart. But it is. Let me see if I got it right here. Okay, this was an ad that came up. I was watching a show with Adrian, and the ad is for Nair, and it's worship yourself. That is literally the ad. That is, and they've got like 5 videos on Nair. You know, I know that it's all like, one's like about thunder thighs and lightning thighs. It was just a bizarre thing. And they talked about own who you are, worship yourself. And I was like, what is happening right now? This is, it couldn't have been more clear where culture and media is trying to direct you. And consumerism is like, we want you to think about you all the time and how you could worship you. I appreciate that Nair just came out with it and was just like, worship yourself. So I think there is that. I think the shooter in Buffalo had a self-glorifying worship of himself that he was trying to achieve, and he got it. And I think it's perpetrated across all media platforms to that we should be trying to worship ourselves. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, totally fair.
So how do we, and then maybe this is the part that, how do we respond to that like self-glory? And should we call it out? Is that okay for me to call out Nair?
Yes.
Because what a weird
that's
deal.
the first commandment.
Yeah. Worship the Lord your God and him only. All right. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, got it. So clearly Nair they are not Jesus followers at Nair.
I don't even know who uses that stuff anymore. It's awful, but whatever.
Yeah. All I know is
I used to as a kid. I had the hairiest arms. I still do. Thank goodness I'm a blonde. Seriously. But I was so insecure about them as a little girl.
Isn't this the problem, though? I mean, should we be insecure about hairy arms?
No.
Okay.
She's not. She said when she was younger. You know.
Yeah.
Now you're over it.
When I was in high school.
After you Naired
and
it
we
all
didn't
off.
even have Instagram or
does
TikTok back then.
Does Nair, like, is it like one and done? I guess that'd be like where
no,
you have
no.
What's it called? Laser hair removal.
It like dissolves the hair below the skin. Like it melts it basically, but it grows back. It doesn't destroy the follicle. Laser hair will try to destroy the follicle.
Got it.
I'm not insecure anymore. You're welcome to come look at my hairy arms anytime. I consider thick hair a blessing. So. What?
No, I wasn't expecting anyone to tell me to kind of look at their hairy arms. That's in general.
I used to use Nair. I used to.
All right. Have you ever used Nair?
Yep.
What? I didn't know. Am I the only non-Nair user? I didn't know that this was like.
Well, Chris, let me just say, your problem is not too much hair.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, I know. It's been alleviated. Okay, yeah. But hey, what can you do? All right, so I do love that. So I feel like there's this thing that we want to worship ourselves, and that's in us, and I think this is probably the greater cultural problem that this guy finding his flock, white nationalism, got them to like, yeah, and he listened to the propaganda. And if I do this, they will finally worship me. I will be famous, and I will make my stand.
It's possible, but also he probably was just really racist and hateful.
Yeah, well, of course. And I think there's probably a myriad of issues that this guy had going on, and he definitely needs some Jesus. Okay, so can I go to the life question for you, Leah? Is it biblical to think that the death penalty should be applied, or should there be life in prison?
I am definitely not the arbiter of truth on this answer, but I can share my thoughts.
That's essentially.
I've gone back and forth over the years between being pro and anti-death penalty.
Okay,
I have.
Okay, right.
When I was in the lobbying for pro-life stuff, I was pretty against the death penalty.
Okay.
To the credit of a lot of Catholics that I worked with.
Okay.
And just seeing a lot of the flaws in the criminal justice system makes me more anti-death penalty, because the death penalty being carried out on somebody that didn't deserve it is just atrocious.
It's an anathema.
An unjust carrying out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, and it feels like we're finding more and more people who are convicted of a crime, and then DNA evidence comes out and like, oh, oops, my B. And they just had 30 years of their life behind bars. I'm totally with you for that. What do you think, Pastor Joseph?
I don't know. Kind of like Leah, back and forth. Just I'm like, because I don't know and I'm undecided. I'm just like, God, I can't be that person to tell somebody yes in their life.
Right.
It's sorry.
No, that's it.
It's tricky because it seems pretty clear that there is a biblical call for it.
No doubt.
For justice, a life for a life.
Mm-hmm. And I think and what's helpful is when that's really clear, and when it's not, that's when it's really scary. So here's the Bible verse that New Testament wise, because obviously an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, that's Old Testament. You hit that in Genesis 9, you hit it in Exodus 20-ish, I guess, whenever it gets to the 10 Commandments and all the laws. But in Romans 13, this is what I thought was sort of interesting. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. And when you read this is Paul writing during a time when he would be executed by Nero, which is just sort of like, as somebody who got death penaltied for something that he did commit. He did commit the crime of sharing the gospel. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgments. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience, and that's why you pay taxes. Okay. So when I read this, what it's clearly said is that my opinion does not matter. And I know this is the part where we do live in a democracy, so clearly my opinion matters. But ultimately, when it comes to, I think governors have the ability to pardon death penalty, and the president has the ability to do that. So I think that's who specifically is in this chair. And so that is for them as a ruling magistrate to decide in that moment. They do not bear the sword for no reason. So government is instituted by God for Christians and non-Christians alike. And this is the part that might offend people. There is no theocracy. And I think that is a reality that this is pointing at, is that that the people who are in government now are there because God has allowed them to be in government now. And this is where I think when some people want to create a theocracy, there's a huge problem with that, because you have to have the Holy Spirit to obey God. And we tried to create a theocracy when we first the Constitution of Massachusetts says for the glory of Jesus. I mean, it's really clear in the proclamation of his name. Well, the problem with that, when you get a lot of unsaved people there, they can't live up to that without the power of the Holy Spirit. And when they've rejected the Holy Spirit, it makes that government really seem sort of odd to carry out something which you have no ability to carry out. Anyway, that's aside. So God's people and not God's people, God has given authority to governmental institutions, whether they're godly or not, because clearly, Paul is writing Romans to Romans who are under the authority of Nero. And so a crazy person that was in charge. And so that makes things sort of weird and bizarre, but God institutes common grace. Government is part of common grace that is effective for all. So although in a sense it doesn't matter what I think, we are in a democracy. Your voice does matter, and so you play a part in that. And so there is a reality that you need to educate yourself, and I kind of follow where you guys are. It just depends. It depends on the crime. It depends on who it is. So having the death penalty available to use, I think, is the right answer. But using it sparingly when justice is needed, I think, is the right answer. And that might be the cop-out answer of like, it depends on the situation and who it is that's being murdered. Anyway, or how the murder was carried out.
There are some ways that we can have a positive impact on that, though, with the whole seeking the good of the city idea. Looking deep into the records of people that are running for office that have the ability to make these laws.
Right.
Like just different criminal justice laws. Like there's I won't name him, but it's a district attorney in the city that I used to live in, who, when he was a district attorney, you look at his record, a lot of times he was out for convictions. There were a lot of problems with his record, but he was a flaming conservative that everybody loved, and they elected him to the House of Representatives. And I think he's getting elected to... Oh, no, he ran for attorney general. He lost, thank goodness. But I mean, everybody loves him. Like, people love him. My parents love him. I've told them this, though. But it's like, you look into the record, you do the work. It's hard. It's hard to do
Olsen, we're so sorry.
It's hard to do the research and to see like these people's records. But then when you elect somebody who's taken advantage of the law, who's put people behind bars that should not have been there, that DNA evidence has later exonerated, it's like, there is something you can do. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's not just voting. It's like, do your research and vote accordingly. And anyway, I told them not to vote for him, but I think my dad still did.
All right. Well, I think that about covers any other parting thoughts there, Pastor Joseph?
No, that's it. It's good.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much. We might get into next time about how Christians should look at the Second Amendment. That was just we didn't have enough time for that in this particular podcast. But hey, listen, if you want to join the podcast, you can text us at 737-231-0605 or find us at pastorplek.com and leave a voicemail for us, and we'll play your voicemail on the podcast so that you too can be famous. All right, sorry. That was not fun. That was too much. All right. But hey, thanks so much for listening and watching. Have an awesome week of worship.